Every student is unique. Every student learns differently, and every student matters.
This is Idea Exchange, the Future of K-12 Education series, brought to you by McMillan, Pazdan Smith Architecture.
Welcome to Idea Exchange, Future of K-12 Education podcast. I'm your host, Ben Thompson. I'm a practicing architect with McMillan, Pazdan Smith Architecture. As an accredited learning environment planner, I lead our firm's K-12 studio to build future-ready schools throughout the Southeast. In this episode, it's my pleasure to welcome Jennifer Parker for a critical conversation on mental health in education and how to support students' well-being by creating a more resilient school environment. Jennifer Parker is a 20-year veteran of the University of South Carolina Upstate as a professor of psychology. She is a licensed counselor with a clinical background where she's focused on mental well-being for children and youth. For over 5 years, she's worked with the Department of Juvenile Justice, performing psychological assessments on youth to determine the root cause behind behavior that results in arrests. Mrs. Parker has most recently started a program to help schools understand the impact of trauma on a child's behavior as a result. She has done a lot of training and teaching in schools about how to create a system that supports emotionally stronger children, with the goal to focus on student achievement and building a more resilient school environment. In her latest venture, she's working with the Spartanburg Academic Movement, or SAM, to adapt a teacher training initiative to equip teachers with necessary resources for trauma-resilient schools. Students today have a lot of internal and external influences that come to bear on their ultimate educational achievement and success. I believe Jennifer would agree that if we hope to improve student achievement in schools, we need to address the mental well-being of school children first. The main focus of our topic today will be, how do we create a school system that supports mental well-being and emotionally strong children? Essentially, what does a trauma-resilient school look like, feel like, and act like? I want to give you a warning. This episode contains a description of a sexual assault. Please be advised if you are listening with small children or in public. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here. And a little confession, this is my first podcast.
Oh, great. Well, you'll do great, I know.
Thank you.
We're just very glad to have you here today. You know, we talked a little bit about beforehand some of the research and the clinical background studies that you've done, and you seem to have found some patterns in the disruptive behaviors that do happen at schools day in and day out, some of which do result in arrests of students also, by the way. As you conclude, these students are actually struggling with the inability to regulate their emotions. Can you describe how you came to that conclusion specifically?
Yeah, so I've worked with many kids for decades, so I'm showing my age here, and many of them were doing poorly in school. By far, the largest percentage of those kids were from the juvenile justice system. So I worked with them after they had been arrested. And my job was to evaluate them and determine what some of the issues were that were preventing them from being successful. And many had been arrested for things like fighting, truancy, disrupting schools, bringing drugs and alcohol to school. But by far, when I conducted the evaluation, they had so many issues going back to early grades, early suspensions. Think about that. Suspended from school in elementary school. You have elementary school kids, right?
Right.
Think about if they get sent home when they have a temper tantrum. So many have been suspended multiple times, multiple grades. Many had a lot of family issues, things like family mental illness, poverty, family violence, big society problems.
Sure.
Yet no one had done anything about that. So we were punishing children for their behavior, but we weren't asking what was going on outside of the classroom.
Right. You know, that's a great point. In recognizing kind of that emotional need earlier seems to be the best solution. How do you go about doing that?
Well, the first thing we want to do is not address the behavior. The behaviors are difficult, and we want to calm down the student. We want to address the behavior, but the first thing we need to do is be curious. what's driving the behavior. So we want to stop and pause and get to know that child and ask, what's going on outside of school?
That's a good place to start. So is it the teacher? Is it the counselor? Who's involved in that process?
Everybody.
Everyone.
Everyone.
Yeah.
It's a very relational process. And when we connect with children, when we get to know them, then we begin to understand what's going on in their lives. Then we can better respond and help them manage what's going on.
Sure. Behavior often results in a plan, whether that be an individual plan or a plan with the parent or the guardian. Tell us a little bit about that plan, that process, and its ultimate goal. You don't want to just, like you say, address the behavior only, but that plan gives you a platform in which to really strive for the educational goal that you're trying to achieve.
Right. So when we see children acting up, disrupting our classes, the first thing we want to do is address the behavior. We've often responded with very punitive plans and tough love, early school suspensions. Those don't work. What they do is actually make the child worse. So we need to understand, by connecting with the child, what's going on in your life. Then we can better identify some of the issues and supports that child may need to be successful. I mentioned the children in juvenile justice that had been referred for a lot of things that involve the schools. And what I realized as I began to evaluate these children, that we had let them down. We had failed them. They were being arrested for things that were criminal charges. But all of the issues that led up to that, no one had ever responded to. So we need to do a better job of identifying what are the issues driving the behavior, and then we can design appropriate responses to actually help them get back on track.
Sure. I want to dive into that a little bit further too. But first, when we think about the whole school environment, the whole learning environment, it's not only just how it's practiced with school, with teachers. It's the building itself too, as a helper to that. Are there attributes to the physical school that might help that to be a little bit more open, to be a little bit more dynamic in that way? Are there things that could help that?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked, and I'm so glad that that's a focus of your work, because the building is very important. The physical structure, the people in the building. When a child comes to school, even before they walk into the building, everything about that building should feel safe. It should feel welcoming and calming. Now, I know we have to have practices in place to help keep children safe, like locks on doors and things like that coming into the building. But there's so much more we can do to create an inviting environment classroom. It does start with the person. So how are we welcoming children? Do we know their names? Do we greet them? Do we have ways of personalizing our interactions? So a lot of children who have experienced adversity, and we know from decades of research, a lot more children have than we're aware of, they don't feel safe. Even if we have locks on the doors and resource officers to keep them safe, they don't feel safe because the people who are supposed to take care of them have not done their jobs. So they're in this constant state of feeling like they need to be on guard. And when we can break that barrier, so that's the first barrier, is creating a sense of safety and calm. That comes from the people, how we treat children even when they are misbehaving. But it also comes from the physical environment. So things like children who are dysregulated can get even more dysregulated with bright lights, loud noises, lots of clutter. So we want to have calm environments that have soothing lights, colors, maybe natural earth colors, not too much in the decor, so they're not overwhelmed by that. Natural lighting matters. So we know from natural light, especially when we can get outdoors, it stimulates neurochemicals like serotonin that actually regulate our mood. So children who are experiencing mild depression or low levels of mood may benefit from natural lighting, or it can also help stimulate other neurochemicals that help motivation and memory. So natural lighting, outdoor classrooms, flexible seating. Mm-hmm. Who doesn't like to bounce around a little bit when they're learning, right? I'm moving around.
I like to do that now.
Feels more calming. And children who have had a lot of stress, even more so, need that. So flexible seating and these types of physical things make a big difference.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that calming environment in to kind of a safety and security aspect, because really we understand the safety and security aspect of it too, is that you have to have that as the basis before you can even get to learning. And so it's multi-tiered. It's not only the stress that you bring in, it's all the measures that you have to have in place for all the other safety and security aspects of a building too.
So, right, when we think of safety, we think of locks on the doors and people to protect children. When a child thinks of safety, they think about positive interactions with adults that they can trust and they can communicate with. So it's both and, but we have to have that sense of safety for the child, because it's their perception of how they feel safe. And many children come from an environment that is not safe. So it's going to take us a minute to figure out how to help them feel calm and safe in our environment. When you're not safe, what's happening to you in your body? You're on a survival mode. You're looking around, hypervigilant, thinking, where's that threat going to come from? And I need to be prepared to respond. So you actually activate a lower part of your brain to help you be safe. It's a natural biological response when we see a wild animal, right? We activate our bodies to survive. So we produce a lot more adrenaline, cortisol, a stress hormone. Our heart rate goes up because we need to get out of harm's way. But what happens with children who come from very tough environments, they've activated that so frequently, it's started to harm their brain development. They're building a very different brain architecture for survival, not for safety.
Wow.
It's damaging neural connections, internal organs over time. So we're putting them on a pathway to lifelong health and social emotional problems if we don't intervene and teach them how to manage that stress response.
Sure.
So it is about stress.
Right. Sure. And I think we often take for granted the stress that students bring into the classroom, bring into the school, and family life. I mean, how big of a role is the family in the success, the educational success of a student?
Yeah. So what's going on in the family is really critical. The schools have the, I think, largest opportunity to help children be successful. We've got a captive audience all day. We can do so much. And let's face it, people that go into education do not do it for the money. They do it for the love of children. So when they can understand and have the tools to help children develop the social emotional skills, then children can be put on a much healthier pathway. But if things aren't going well at home, they're still going to struggle. We need to help the families as well. Spartanburg Academic Movement, where I'm employed, we have a 2-generational approach I'm very excited about. We are working in the schools to help bring this professional development to educators, to continue helping children, to continue to incorporate the social emotional learning in classrooms, design, optimal schools. But we're also working in the community to support the families. So when we can partner with school, community, family, then we can really see some societal change. So I'm very excited about that.
That's
a lot of
exciting.
Our families experienced a lot of adversity in childhood, a lot of poor school outcomes, and that trajectory just continued. So
that's great. That's wonderful.
It's never too late.
Sure. No. And you shared a little bit about a story that might kind of give that another perspective is it's a harrowing story of a 13-year-old that you saw that was arrested for truancy, not attending school. You had an aha moment though about that. So I'd love you to share that story to kind of put a context to those words.
And that's a hard story. And that was an aha moment in how we intend to do the right thing for children in schools, but a lot of our interventions have actually caused harm and hindered them from continuing to do well. So in this particular case, this was probably the one that stays with me the most. I had a 13-year-old that I was assigned to do an evaluation who had been adjudicated for truancy. And I looked at her record. She was 13. Her zip code told me she lived in a very tough area. I began my interview with her. She had a single mom. Didn't take me long to realize her mom had issues with drugs, alcohol, and was likely engaged in prostitution to support her drug habit. That's a very common profession for many women who have issues with substance abuse. So this 13-year-old would get up in the morning, get herself ready for school, walk through an alley, and catch a bus to school. She got up one morning, walked to the alley, and she was violently attacked and raped. And she just turned around and went back home.
Wow.
She went into her room, she shut the door, and had severe trauma. She didn't tell anyone. So when she didn't come to school for weeks, the schools, they send letters, then they arrest you and they arrest, the parent and send you to juvenile justice. So when she comes in, and I just simply, after a few minutes, said, tell me why you're not going to school. And when she told me, it was very heart-wrenching. The good thing is we were able to get some support and help for her. It had been months. She had not told anyone. She didn't think anyone cared. No one had ever asked her, what's going on at home? No one ever went to her home. So I think it's really critical that we do go to homes. When this was a 13-year-old, when they're not coming to school, there is a reason. Let's go find out why. So,
So
that one has stayed with me.
Sure.
There are many others.
Yeah, I bet. So how do you move that forward? How do you then respond to that situation? That's probably an extreme example. How do you respond to that mental health?
On the personal level, getting her support for her trauma. She had PTSD and effects from the trauma. It probably wasn't the only time she had been sexually assaulted, but it was the most violent and frightening for her. Getting her the support she needed, but also getting support for that mom who was also dealing with her own issues. Now, clearly, this isn't a child that needed to be in that environment. So getting Child Protective Services involved. In a lot of the training I have done with schools, it has been how to recognize abuse and neglect when you need to report it and when you need to just identify that you've got children that are struggling and what kind of resources do I need to connect them to? When we take a relational approach, when we get to know our children and we build trust with them, they will tell us what's going on in their lives. And a teacher is not a social worker, they are not a therapist, but they do have access to referring and helping connect children with resources.
And you're actively doing that with teachers right now, training programs, right? Is that part of Sam's
Yes, it is,
mission?
and we're excited about that. We really love getting this information out. We believe when we know the impact of this adversity on a child's development and capacity to learn, it changes. It changes. We have these aha moments and change our mindset, and then we can respond more effectively. When a child's truant, we're not going to arrest them. We're going to go see what's going on at home. And if there's serious issues, we're going to get help. So no one teacher is expected to do that. This is a whole school approach. This is a whole community approach. and we build a community of support around our children and families, then we can prevent a lot. We've taken a tough love approach. I'd love to share one more story.
Sure.
I met a fabulous young principal who was going to be successful in his career, very, very clear, very smart, talented. But he was a new principal at an elementary school, a high poverty elementary school with a lot of behavior problems. When he got to the school, he said there was no discipline. So his first response was, I'm going to whip this school in shape. Every kid that acts up is going home. So suspensions went up. He said, I always told him I loved him, but I sent him home. Now think about that. Are we helping a child get better when we use that approach? They're going home to more stress, more trauma. They're missing our great and, supportive environment. They're not getting the educational instruction they need, the positive peer interactions. But then we invite them back and expect them to be better.
Right.
And typically they're worse.
Right.
And after years of that, they start to fall further and further behind. So we have created a trajectory where it's not a shocker. These kids are going to drop out or wind up in the juvenile justice system.
And that's an interesting aspect too, because I think it feeds into some of the things that you've said before about lowering the bar.
Yeah.
When it comes to anything from expectations of an individual student, but also, even graduating a student that might not be at that achievement level that he or she needs to be in for the next grade level. It seems like even in that story that you just described, you're putting at risk the achievement by lowering that bar. Is that how you feel about it? Is that how you think about it? And is that a mistake?
Worst thing we can do is lower the bar. And again, the hundreds of children, more than hundreds actually, that I've worked with, the bar had been lowered. They had been passed along with very low expectations. When kids come from high poverty environments, when they're acting up, they can't regulate their behavior, we label them as slow learners. We don't expect much from them. So over time, they're going to give us exactly what we ask for, and they're going to meet that low bar. We've got to hold the bar high, and then we've got to show them how to get there. And it's going to take some strategy. So we can't send them home. Now, there are times when a child can't stay in school. If there's violence and problems in the upper grades where it's a threat to the school, that is not what I'm talking about. But talking about children that are dysregulated and having difficulty regulating their emotions and managing the stress in their lives. So let's go back to the environmental things. There are things in the classroom we can do. And a lot of our schools are doing this. They're putting things like, they're called calm zones, peace corners, places where a child can go in the room and just calm down. So they have permission to get up, to walk around, to go to this special place in the room. It is not a timeout. It is a place where they can go with dignity, identify how they're feeling, and use some tools to calm themselves. Now, who doesn't like that, right?
Sure.
I like peace corners, calm zones as well. But for children who have no peace, they've never had the opportunity to learn, that's powerful. So we are empowering them to identify what's going on, the feelings, the emotions, and giving them tools to regulate it. And that is putting them on a path to learning and success.
Well, that's such such an interesting point too. Is that we often think about the lessons that you learn as an elementary student all the way through your K-12 career as just kind of the programs that are the things that you're doing at the school, but it really is about social learning as well, and emotional learning. That's a big piece of it that we obviously take for granted sometimes. And this is what I'm trying to say.
Our teachers are well equipped to teach the topics they've been taught, the academic skills, but they haven't been given as many tools and opportunities to incorporate those into the curriculum. That's powerful. In fact, if you look at some of the research, Harvard, Yale, I don't know who did it first, but there's this concept of emotional intelligence, and it's really social emotional skills, but it's things like empathy and being able to communicate well, get along with others, regulate your emotions. When you can do that as an adult, you're going to be much more successful in life, right? You don't want to be in a relationship with someone who can't regulate their emotions or communicate well or work with colleagues. You don't want to be on the highway with someone who can't manage their emotions. They may engage in road rage, and we see that escalate even to workplace violence. So it's critical that we learn these skills to manage our emotions. And the school is an optimal place to incorporate that into the curriculum. And across every grade, probably more important than the language arts and mathematics, that they can learn these social emotional skills.
Right.
There's a big emphasis on that, rightly, to incorporate that into the curriculum.
Right, and sure, and every state really is grabbing on to what does that 21st century student look like? What are the outcomes? What should that graduate of a high school look like? And I see oftentimes it is about, we need collaborative, well-equipped students who can really listen and lead. And really, the baseline for that, as you've really described, is being able to control, having emotional caring, having emotional behavior. Or behavior that really controls that emotion really starts, I would guess, at the very beginning.
So emotional intelligence, there's some great research around that, and much better predictor of life success. We certainly need strong academic skills, but in absence of those emotional skills, we're not likely to be successful unless we just like to be a loner and do those things that don't require interactions with other people.
Sure.
But when children from high stress environments continually access that stress response system, it does change the architecture of their brain. We know from neural development that can be rewired. That's a simplistic way, but the brain is constantly changing. And when we do respond to children with giving them the skills they need to calm that system down, they can rewire some of those connections that have put them on that dysregulated pathway.
Sure.
But if you don't, then they're going to have a difficult time learning. When we're in that survival mode, we are not able to engage in the learning process.
Right.
So it does start with helping kids feel safe, calm, and regulating their emotions.
Sure. Well, any final thoughts on making that trauma resilient school? Anything that we haven't mentioned that you think that we really need to understand to make that successful student at the end of the day?
So this should be a whole school approach.
Sure.
Everyone should be involved in the process. I didn't mention teachers have a really hard job, and we're expecting a lot from them. So as we're thinking about safety and care for children, we should also be thinking about safety and care for our educators. How can we provide the support that they need? So there's a big shift in education around providing spaces for teachers to be able to step out, regulate their own emotions. We know a lot of our teachers struggle with some of the same issues. A lot of our educators, kids can trigger that. So a whole school approach where we are supporting our teachers, giving them the tools they need, recognizing that they need to take care of themselves. Everyone is trauma informed and understands the impact on a child and has the trauma-sensitive responses to help children become resilient. Resilient children, they're not born resilient. Your children weren't born resilient. You've had to do a lot to help them develop those skills. A lot of children don't have that opportunity. So it's a learned skills to become resilient. And we can do a lot in the schools to build that. We can do a lot in our communities to help our families be more resilient.
Well, I think being active and schools as kind of centers of community, I think about that often, is that's really what community means, is being very active and looking out for our fellow citizens, of course, but our community members as well within those areas and neighborhoods and communities. That's great. Well, I really just appreciate you sharing, this perspective, which I think folks will really understand a lot more about as a result of this conversation. So I appreciate you coming and sharing that with us today. You're in the process of launching a training initiative for students around that trauma resilient school. Is there any more information you'd like to share on that initiative, or where people might be able to go for additional resources?
So Sam has a resilient schools, resilient communities approach. We call it a 2-generational approach. We can be reached at the Spartanburg Academic Movement. I can be reached at Jay Parker at learnwithsam.org for more information as we begin to unfold some of these training initiatives and opportunities that we hope to be able to provide to communities, or actually not provide to communities, but engage with communities. So it's really more about the power of place, the power of helping communities be able to have what they need to have better lives, better access, removing barriers. But I especially appreciate all that you're doing in the schools to hold space for this, to talk about it, to advance the work. It's important. It matters. So thank you. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you
It's
very
been
much.
exciting to meet you.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thank you, Jennifer. Next week, we'll talk about ways we can rethink school buildings and systems as schools prepare for short-term and long-term planning in the wake of COVID-19 and other imminent challenges. We hope you'll continue listening, and please tell your friends and colleagues to tune into this series as well. Idea Exchange, the Future of K-12 Education podcast series, is brought to you by McMillan Pazdan Smith. The K-12 studio at McMillan Pazdan Smith is focused on helping schools prepare future-ready students. Have a question for me or a topic you'd like to address? Please complete the contact form listed in the episode description.
Thanks for tuning in to Idea Exchange, the Future of K-12 Education series. This series is recorded at Bramble Jam Studios in Greenville, South Carolina. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode.